12-year-old Riley stood in the middle of the biggest room she had ever seen. The Galactic Council's exhibition hall stretched out like a football stadium, but instead of bleachers, there were floating platforms where aliens of every imaginable shape and size watched from above. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and a few looked like they were made of living crystal that sparkled under the bright lights. Riley's hands were shaking as she carefully placed her great-grandfather's samurai sword on the metal display stand. The katana was old, really old, with a dark wooden handle wrapped in faded silk cord. The blade itself caught the light in a way that made it look almost alive, but Riley knew most people here wouldn't appreciate that. They would just see an ancient piece of metal. Her mom had flown all the way from Oregon to the Council space station just to watch this presentation. Riley could see her in the human observation section, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. It helped a little but not much. Riley had practiced her speech 100 times, but now that she was actually standing here with thousands of alien eyes watching her, all those practiced words seemed to evaporate from her brain. The exhibition was supposed to showcase important cultural artifacts from newly inducted species. Earth had just joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago, and every species got to send one young representative to present something meaningful from their world. Riley had been chosen because her essay about her family's sword had won a nationwide competition. She thought it was an honor. Now she was starting to wonder if it was more like punishment. Before she could even begin her presentation, she heard it. Laughter. It started low, like a rumbling sound that reminded her of when her dad's old truck wouldn't start. But then it got louder. Riley looked up and saw a group of massive aliens in the front section. They were called the Vrex, and they looked like someone had taken a bodybuilder and stretched him to 8 feet tall, then covered him in blue metallic skin. They wore armor that glowed with some kind of internal light, and weapons hung from their belts that hummed with energy. The biggest Vrex was pointing at her sword with one of his 4 arms. He said something in his own language, and a small floating device translated his words into English. Is that a sharpened piece of iron? Does the human child truly believe this primitive tool deserves to be displayed among galactic artifacts? More laughter erupted around the hall. Riley felt her face getting hot. She wanted to grab the sword and run back to the transport ship. But her feet stayed planted on the floor. An alien that looked like a giant praying mantis clicked its sharp mandibles together. Through its translator, Riley heard, "My species abandoned blade weapons 17,000 years ago. Why would anyone still carry such things?" Even the friendly-looking alien seemed confused. A group of small, furry creatures that reminded Riley of talking teddy bears whispered among themselves. Their translators picked up fragments. Outdated technology, sentimental value. Poor humans don't understand modern warfare. The Vrex commander stood up from his seat, and when he moved, everyone paid attention. His armor made a soft whirring sound, and the weapons on his belt glowed brighter. He walked down from the viewing platform with heavy footsteps that echoed through the hall. Each step made Riley feel smaller and smaller. "Human child," he said, and his voice was deep enough that Riley felt it in her chest. "I am Commander Thalnos of the Vrex warrior caste. I mean no disrespect to your species, but surely you understand that such weapons are relics of a primitive past. My people used similar tools 50,000 years ago, before we discovered plasma technology and energy shields. This sword cannot penetrate modern armor. It cannot compete with laser rifles. It is, forgive my bluntness, useless in the context of galactic civilization." The hall went quiet. Everyone was waiting to see what Riley would do. Some aliens looked sympathetic, others seemed amused, and a few appeared genuinely curious about how she would respond. Riley's hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't just from nervousness. She was angry. Not the loud, yelling kind of angry, but the quiet, burning kind that her grandfather had taught her to channel into focus. She looked at Commander Thalnos, then at her sword, then back at the commander. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than his, but it didn't shake. "May I demonstrate something before you decide my sword is useless?" The commander's face showed something that might have been amusement. "Demonstrate? What could you possibly show us, child?" Riley straightened her shoulders. "Let me try to prove my sword's worth. If I fail, I'll accept your judgment. But if I succeed, you have to listen to why this blade matters." Commander Thalnos stared down at Riley for what felt like forever. His blue metallic face was hard to read, but his 4 arms crossed in front of his chest in a way that made it clear he thought this was all very amusing. Around the exhibition hall, the murmuring grew louder. Aliens were talking to each other in dozens of different languages, and even though the translators were working overtime, Riley could tell what they were saying without needing a translation. They all thought this was going to be entertaining in the worst possible way. The commander uncrossed his arms and gestured to one of his assistants, a smaller Vrex who immediately jogged over to a storage area at the side of the hall. Riley watched as the assistant wheeled out what looked like a mannequin, but it was made of some strange dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The thing stood about 6 feet tall and had the basic shape of a humanoid body, though it was clearly just a practice dummy. "This," Commander Thalnos announced, his voice booming across the hall, "is a standard Galactic Alliance combat training dummy. It is constructed from reinforced carbon titanium composite matrix, the same material we use in military-grade body armor. This dummy has been tested against Class 5 plasma rifles, Mark 7 laser cutters, and even Corthan acid projectiles. It has withstood them all with minimal damage." He walked around the dummy, tapping it with one of his massive hands. The sound was dull and heavy like knocking on a bank vault. The self-repair nanobots embedded in the material can seal wounds caused by energy weapons within seconds. Our finest warriors train against these targets because they simulate real combat conditions. Riley swallowed hard. The dummy looked impossibly tough. She had seen her grandfather cut through bamboo stalks and rolled tatama mats, but this was something completely different. This was alien technology, stuff that was probably centuries ahead of anything on Earth. Thalnos turned back to face Riley, and now she could see something in his expression that looked almost like pity. "So here is my proposal, human child. If your primitive blade can create even a small scratch on this dummy's surface, I will offer a formal apology to you and your entire species. I will acknowledge that perhaps there is some value in your ancient traditions that I have failed to appreciate." That sounded reasonable, almost generous. Riley was about to accept when Thalnos held up one of his hands. "However," he continued, and Riley's stomach sank, "when you fail this demonstration, as I am certain you will, I will file an official report with the Galactic Council. This report will state that humanity's attachment to outdated technology and primitive weaponry suggests your species is culturally unsuited for participation in the advanced military training programs. Earth's application to join the Galactic Defense Initiative will be marked as rejected." The hall erupted in shocked gasps and excited chatter. Riley felt like someone had punched her in the gut. This wasn't just about her anymore. This wasn't just about defending her great-grandfather's sword. If she failed, she would be closing doors for every human who wanted to train in galactic combat techniques. She would be the reason Earth got labeled as backwards and primitive. She looked over at the human observation section. Her mom's face had gone pale. Next to her, the Earth's diplomatic representative, a man named Mr. Peterson, was frantically typing something on his data pad, probably trying to figure out if he could stop this whole thing. But Riley knew it was too late. Commander Thalnos had made his challenge in front of hundreds of witnesses from dozens of different worlds. Backing down now would be just as bad as failing. Riley looked at the combat dummy again. Up close, she could see faint scorch marks on its surface where plasma weapons had hit it. The marks were already fading as the nanobots worked to repair the material. How was she supposed to cut through something that could heal itself and withstand military weapons? Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They had moved past nervous and gone straight to numb. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear her grandfather's voice from all those summer afternoons in his backyard dojo. "Riley," he used to say, "a sword is only as good as the person holding it. The blade doesn't have strength. You have strength. The blade doesn't have focus. You have focus." She took a deep breath and looked Commander Thalnos straight in his alien eyes. "I accept your challenge." The commander's expression shifted to something that looked like satisfaction. He had expected her to accept. Of course he had. What else could she do? Refuse and let everyone think humans were cowards? At least this way she would fail with dignity. "Excellent," Thalnos said, stepping back to give her room. "You may begin whenever you are ready. Take your time to prepare. I want everyone here to witness that you were given every possible advantage." The way he said it made it clear he thought no amount of preparation would help. Around the hall, aliens were repositioning themselves to get better views. Some were recording with devices that floated in the air. Others were placing what looked like bets, their translators picking up phrases like, 30 seconds before she gives up, and the blade will probably break on impact. Riley walked over to the display stand and picked up her great-grandfather's katana. The weight of it felt familiar in her hands, comforting even. She had held this sword hundreds of times, cleaned it, practiced with it, learned its balance and rhythm. But she had never tried to cut through alien military armor before. The combat dummy stood there waiting, silent and imposing. Riley positioned herself in front of it, the sword still in its scabbard. She needed to think. She needed a plan. But more than anything, she needed to remember everything her grandfather had taught her about what a katana really was and what it could do. Riley stood in front of the combat dummy for a long moment, just staring at it. The entire exhibition hall had gone quiet, waiting for her to make her move. She could feel thousands of alien eyes watching her, probably expecting her to just swing the sword wildly and embarrass herself. That's what most kids her age would do, right? Just hack away and hope for the best. Instead, she did something that confused everyone. She walked away from the dummy. A wave of whispers rolled through the crowd. Commander Thalnos tilted his head, his metallic blue face showing clear puzzlement. Riley ignored all of it. She found a clear spot on the floor about 10 feet from the dummy and slowly lowered herself down into a kneeling position. Her knees touched the cold metal floor, and she placed the sheathed sword carefully in front of her. "Is the human giving up already?" someone called out from the crowd. Scattered laughter followed. But Riley wasn't giving up. She was doing exactly what her grandfather had made her do before every single practice session for the past 4 years. She was preparing. Not her body. Her mind. She placed her hands flat on her thighs and closed her eyes. The laughter and whispers faded into background noise as she focused on her breathing. In through her nose, slow and steady. Out through her mouth, even slower. Her grandfather used to tell her that most people breathed like they were in a hurry, shallow and quick, always rushing to the next moment. But a swordsman needed to breathe like they had all the time in the world. What is the human child doing? That was a different voice now, less mocking, more curious. Riley didn't open her eyes to see who had spoken. She kept breathing, letting each exhale carry away a little bit of her nervousness. With her eyes closed, she could picture her grandfather's backyard dojo more clearly. The wooden floor worn smooth by decades of bare feet. The smell of bamboo and old wood. The way afternoon sunlight would stream through the paper screens and make everything glow golden. "Grandpa," she had asked once when she was 8 years old, "why do we always sit like this before practice? Can't we just start?" Her grandfather had smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Riley, anyone can pick up a sword and swing it. That takes no skill at all. But to use a katana properly, you need to understand something important. The cut begins long before the blade moves. It begins in your mind, in your breath, in your spirit. If your mind is scattered, your cut will be scattered. If your breath is unsteady, your cut will be unsteady." She had thought that was just old person talk back then, the kind of mystical stuff that sounded cool but didn't really mean anything. But as she practiced year after year, she started to understand. The times when she rushed into a cut, thinking about other things, worrying about messing up, those were the times when her form fell apart. The bamboo stalks wouldn't split cleanly. Her balance would be off. But the times when she took those few minutes to just breathe and center herself, those were the times when everything clicked into place. Riley opened her eyes. The exhibition hall snapped back into focus, but something felt different now. She felt calmer, more grounded. She stood up slowly, picking up the sword as she rose. Her movements were deliberate and careful, no rushing, no hesitation. She turned to face the crowd and was surprised to see that they had stopped laughing. Commander Thalnos was watching her with an expression that was harder to read now. Some of the other aliens were leaning forward in their seats, genuinely curious about what she was doing. "Before I attempt this," Riley said, her voice carrying across the quiet hall, "I want to explain something about this sword. Because I don't think most of you understand what a katana actually is." She drew the blade from its scabbard with a soft, ringing sound. The polished steel caught the light and seemed to glow. "This isn't just a sharp piece of metal. My great-grandfather received this sword from his teacher, who received it from his teacher, going back almost 400 years. The man who forged this blade spent months creating it. He heated the steel and folded it over and over, thousands of times, hammering out impurities and creating layers so thin you can't even see them." Riley held the sword up so everyone could see the faint, wavy pattern along the blade. That pattern is called the hamon. It's created during the tempering process. The edge of the blade is incredibly hard enough to cut through most materials. But the spine of the blade is more flexible, so it won't shatter on impact. It's 2 different types of steel in one blade, and making that work requires knowledge passed down through generations. She saw some aliens nodding now, particularly the ones who looked like scholars or historians. They were starting to understand that this wasn't just a random old weapon. This was craftsmanship. "But even a perfectly made sword is useless without proper technique," Riley continued. She moved into a standing position, feet shoulder-width apart, the sword held in both hands at her side. "My grandfather spent 50 years learning how to use a katana. He always said he was still a student, still learning. Because using this weapon isn't about strength. It's about precision, timing, focus. She demonstrated the basic stance, showing how her weight was distributed evenly, how her grip was firm but not tense, how the sword became an extension of her arms rather than a separate tool. When you swing a katana, you're not just using your arms. You're using your whole body. Your legs provide the power. Your hips provide the rotation. Your core provides the stability. Your arms and hands provide the guidance. Everything has to work together perfectly, or the cut fails. Commander Thalnos stepped closer, his earlier mockery replaced by something that looked almost like respect. This is similar to the ancient warrior traditions of my own people, he said quietly. Before we developed energy weapons, our fighters trained in the use of bladed weapons. The training was intense, sometimes brutal. It took years to master. Exactly, Riley said, grateful that at least one person in the room understood. This sword represents thousands of hours of practice. Every morning for 4 years I've trained with my grandfather. Basic cuts, advanced cuts, footwork, breathing, meditation. All of it building toward one goal, making a perfect cut. She turned back to face the dummy. So when I approach this target, I'm not just swinging a sword and hoping for the best. I'm applying everything I've learned. I'm focusing every part of my mind and body on one single moment, one single movement. Riley took 3 more slow breaths, feeling her heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm. The hall was completely silent now. Even the translator devices seemed to have muted themselves, as if they understood that something important was about to happen. She adjusted her grip on the sword, feeling the silk cord wrap against her palms. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind one more time. The sword doesn't cut because it's sharp, Riley. It cuts because you commit to the cut completely. No hesitation. No doubt. Just pure intention. Riley looked at the combat dummy one last time, her eyes tracing the line where she would strike. Then she settled into her stance, raised the sword, and prepared to show the galaxy what human discipline really meant. Riley's world narrowed down to 3 things: her breath, the sword, and the exact spot on the dummy where she needed to strike. Everything else disappeared. The thousands of watching aliens, the floating cameras, even her own nervousness, all of it faded into the background like static on an old television. She held the katana in a middle guard position, the blade angled slightly upward, her left hand near the bottom of the handle and her right hand just below the guard. This was the stance her grandfather had drilled into her so many times that her muscles remembered it even when her brain was too tired to think. Her feet were positioned just right, her weight balanced perfectly between them, ready to shift forward in an instant. The combat dummy stood there, dark and silent, like it was daring her to try. Riley could see the faint scorch marks on its surface where plasma weapons had failed to do any real damage. She could see the slight shimmer of the nanobots working beneath the surface, ready to repair any damage she might manage to cause. The material looked impossibly tough, like trying to cut through a concrete wall with a kitchen knife. But Riley wasn't thinking about that anymore. She was thinking about water. That's what her grandfather always told her to imagine. A sword cut should flow like water, he would say. Water doesn't fight against rocks. It doesn't try to smash through them with force. It finds the path and flows through it naturally. She took one more breath. This one was different from the others. It was deeper, coming from somewhere low in her belly. As she inhaled, she felt her center of gravity drop slightly, her stance becoming more solid, more rooted to the ground. As she exhaled, she felt her shoulders relax, her grip on the sword becoming lighter, more natural. Then she moved. It happened so fast that most of the aliens in the hall didn't even see it clearly. One moment Riley was standing still, the sword raised and ready. The next moment she was in a completely different position, the sword extended in front of her, her back leg stretched out behind her, her whole body forming a straight line of perfect balance. The movement had started from her feet. Her back leg had driven forward with explosive power, pushing her whole body into the cut. Her hips had rotated at exactly the right moment, adding torque to the movement. Her core muscles had engaged, providing stability. And her arms had extended, guiding the blade along the precise path she had visualized. But it wasn't just about physical movement. As the sword had traveled through the air, Riley had done something her grandfather called cutting with intent. She hadn't just swung the blade at the dummy. She had focused every ounce of her attention on the exact line she wanted to cut, imagining the blade passing through the material like it wasn't even there. No hesitation. No doubt. Just complete commitment to the cut. The sound was unlike anything anyone in that hall had ever heard. It wasn't a clash or a clang. It wasn't the hiss of a plasma weapon or the buzz of a laser. It was a single sharp note, almost musical, that rang out across the silent space. The katana had made contact with the dummy's surface at the perfect angle, with perfect speed, with the full weight of Riley's body behind it. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The dummy stood there unchanged. Riley remained in her follow-through position, the sword extended, her breathing still controlled and steady. Commander Thalnos leaned forward slightly, his blue metallic face showing what might have been disappointment. Had the human child failed after all that preparation? Then someone gasped. It was one of the small furry aliens in the third row. They had noticed it first. A thin line had appeared across the dummy's midsection, so perfectly straight it looked like it had been drawn with a ruler. The line grew wider, and then, with a sound like a whisper, the top half of the combat dummy slid sideways and toppled to the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the entire hall. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the translator devices seemed too shocked to make their usual ambient humming sounds. Every alien in that room was staring at the two pieces of the combat dummy lying on the floor, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Riley slowly straightened up, bringing the sword back to a resting position. Her hands were steady now, not shaking at all. She looked down at the cut surface of the dummy and felt a small surge of pride. It was perfect. The surface was smooth as glass, so clean that it looked polished. There were no jagged edges, no rough spots, no signs of tearing or crushing. The blade had separated the molecules so cleanly that the dummy's self-repair nanobots couldn't even detect that there had been damage. They had nothing to repair because the cut was too perfect. Commander Thalnos walked slowly toward the fallen dummy, his forearms hanging loosely at his sides. He knelt down on one knee, which was remarkable because Riley had never seen such a large alien move with that kind of careful reverence. He ran one of his massive hands across the cut surface, feeling the smoothness of it. His blue skin flickered through several different shades, which Riley guessed meant he was experiencing some strong emotion. "This is impossible," he said quietly, but his voice carried across the hall anyway. "Our plasma blades leave rough edges. They cauterize as they cut, melting the material. Our laser cutters create heat damage zones that spread several centimeters from the cut point. But this..." He looked up at Riley with an expression that might have been awe. "This is cleaner than anything our technology can achieve." "How?" Riley carefully cleaned the blade on a cloth she kept in her belt, just like her grandfather had taught her. "You always cleaned your sword immediately after use no matter what." It was a sign of respect for the weapon and for the art. As she wiped away the microscopic particles from the cut, she tried to find the right words to explain. "It's about the edge," she said finally. "A katana's edge can be sharpened down to just a few molecules wide. That's sharper than most industrial cutting tools you probably use. And when you combine that extreme sharpness with proper technique, with the right angle and the right speed and the right amount of force, the blade doesn't tear through material. It separates it at the molecular level." An alien that looked like a floating jellyfish drifted closer, its tentacles quivering with excitement. Its translator device spoke in a high-pitched voice. "But the energy required for such a cut must be enormous. What power source does the weapon use?" Riley sheathed the katana with a smooth, practiced motion. "No power source. Just me. My legs, my body, my focus. That's what I've been trying to explain. This isn't about technology. It's about human discipline and dedication." She could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the crowd. This wasn't just a demonstration of an old weapon. This was a demonstration of what humans could do when they committed themselves fully to mastering something. No computers. No assistance systems. Just years of practice and unwavering focus. Commander Thalnos stood up, his full height seeming even more imposing than before. But when he looked at Riley now, there was no mockery in his eyes. Only respect. Riley stood there holding her great-grandfather's sword, watching as Commander Thalnos processed what had just happened. The massive Rex warrior was still staring at the two pieces of the combat dummy like they were some kind of magic trick he couldn't figure out. All around the exhibition hall, aliens were leaning over railings, zooming in with their recording devices, and chattering excitedly in languages that made Riley's translator work overtime. Finally, Commander Thalnos straightened up to his full imposing height. His forearms moved in a complex gesture that Riley's translator identified as a formal sign of respect in Vrex culture. When he spoke, his deep voice had lost all traces of mockery. "Riley of Earth, I offer my sincere apology. I have misjudged both you and your weapon. More importantly, I have misjudged what your species is capable of." Riley nodded, accepting the apology, but she wasn't done yet. The commander had promised to listen if she succeeded, and she had things she needed to say. Things that went way beyond just defending her family's sword. "Thank you, Commander," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent hall. "But I want everyone here to understand something important. This sword didn't cut through that dummy because it's special or magical. It cut through because of what it represents." She held up the katana so everyone could see it clearly. This blade was made over 400 years ago by a human craftsman who spent his entire life learning how to forge steel. He didn't have fancy alien technology or automated machines. He had a hammer, a forge, and knowledge that had been passed down through generations. He folded this steel thousands of times, creating layers so thin you need a microscope to see them. Every hammer strike was done with intention, with focus, with the understanding that he was creating something that would outlast his own lifetime. An elderly alien from a species Riley didn't recognize raised one of its tentacle-like appendages. "But surely your people have abandoned such primitive manufacturing methods by now? You have access to modern fabrication technology." Riley smiled slightly. "We do. We can make knives and swords in factories now using machines and computers. They're cheaper, faster to produce, and probably more consistent in quality. But we haven't abandoned the old way. There are still human craftsmen who spend decades learning to forge blades by hand, keeping the tradition alive. Because it's not really about the sword. It's about the discipline, the patience, the dedication to mastering something difficult." She walked slowly around the pieces of the dummy, gathering her thoughts. Her mom was watching from the observation section with tears in her eyes, which made Riley feel both proud and a little embarrassed. Mr. Peterson, the diplomatic representative, was frantically taking notes on his data pad, probably already thinking about how to use this moment for Earth's benefit. "My grandfather started teaching me when I was 8 years old," Riley continued. 4 years of practice. Every morning before school I would go to his dojo and train. Basic cuts, advanced cuts, footwork, breathing exercises, meditation. Some days I didn't want to go. Some days I was tired or had homework or just wanted to sleep in. But Grandpa always said the same thing. He said, "Riley, discipline means doing what needs to be done even when you don't feel like doing it." A small alien that looked like a walking tree branch spoke up through its translator. "But why would your species invest so much time in learning to use weapons that are, as you admit, outdated? Surely there are more efficient ways to train warriors." Riley had been hoping someone would ask that question. Because learning to use a katana teaches you things that no computer program or virtual training simulator can teach. It teaches you patience because you can't rush a proper cut. It teaches you focus because one moment of distraction ruins everything. It teaches you respect because you're handling a weapon that can be dangerous if misused. And most importantly, it teaches you that mastery takes time. There are no shortcuts. She looked directly at Commander Thalnos. "You mentioned earlier that your people used blade weapons 50,000 years ago before you discovered energy weapons. I'm guessing you probably have training programs that can teach a soldier how to use a plasma rifle in a few weeks, maybe a few months." Thalnos nodded slowly. "Our advanced training simulations can create a competent plasma rifle operator in approximately 6 standard weeks." "Exactly," Riley said. "And that's great for your military, I'm sure. But here's the thing. My grandfather has been studying the sword for 50 years, and he still says he's learning. 50 years. That's longer than some species in this room have been part of the Galactic Council. And he's not unusual. There are sword masters on Earth who have dedicated their entire lives to perfecting their technique, and they still find new depths to explore." The hall was completely silent now. Every alien was listening intently, trying to understand what Riley was getting at. "What you all need to understand about humans," Riley said carefully, "is that we're really, really good at dedication. When we commit to something, we don't give up. We pass knowledge down through families, through generations. My great-grandfather taught my grandfather. My grandfather taught me. And one day if I have kids I'll teach them. The sword is just one example, but it's true for everything we do. We have musicians who practice their instruments for decades. Scientists who spend their whole lives studying one specific thing. Athletes who train every single day for years just to compete in one event." A crystalline alien in the back row spoke up, its voice chiming like bells. "Are you suggesting that this dedication makes humans dangerous?" Riley thought about that for a moment. "I guess it depends on your perspective. We're not aggressive by nature. We don't want to fight. But if you push us, if you threaten us or the people we care about, then yeah, we can be dangerous. Because we'll dedicate ourselves completely to protecting what matters to us. We'll spend years training. We'll pass down knowledge through generations. We'll master skills that other species consider outdated or inefficient. And we'll do it all with the same focus I just used to cut through that dummy. Commander Thalnos was nodding now, his blue skin shifting to a shade that Riley's translator identified as indicating deep thought. I begin to understand. When I filed my report about humanity's suitability for military training, I was planning to cite your attachment to primitive weapons as evidence of cultural backwardness. But now I see I had it completely wrong. Your attachment to these traditions is not a weakness. It is perhaps your greatest strength. He turned to address the entire hall. Fellow council members, I wish to formally reverse my earlier statement. Humanity should not be excluded from advanced military training programs. Instead, I recommend that we approach their inclusion with considerable caution and respect. A species that can teach their children such deadly precision without any technological assistance, that can pass lethal skills through generations, that can maintain dedication to mastery over decades, such a species should be recognized as formidable. The hall erupted in discussion. Some aliens were nodding in agreement. Others looked concerned, probably worried about what humanity might do with access to advanced galactic technology. A few looked impressed, viewing Earth with new eyes. Riley carefully placed her sword back on the display stand. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. She had done what she came here to do. She had defended her family's honor, protected Earth's reputation, and taught the galaxy an important lesson about human nature. As the exhibition coordinator began trying to restore order to the chaotic hall, Riley caught her mom's eye in the observation section. Her mom was crying and smiling at the same time, which was very much a mom thing to do. Next to her, Mr. Peterson was on his communication device, probably calling Earth to report what had happened. Within hours, news of Riley's demonstration would spread across the entire Galactic Council network. Military academies would begin requesting information about Earth's martial arts traditions. Anthropologists would start studying human dedication and generational knowledge transfer. And in the quiet offices of various species defense departments, strategists would begin asking themselves a very important question. If humans could do this with primitive swords and years of training, what would they be capable of with access to advanced galactic technology? Riley didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that her grandfather would be proud, and that his teachings had just changed how an entire galaxy viewed humanity. Not bad for a 12-year-old girl with an old sword.